So I'm really happy to have you with us today. Welcome. Thank you for being here, and I will let you introduce yourself.
Well, first, thank you for having me. So excited to be here with you. And I see so many names. I've interacted with LinkedIn over the past couple of years on the call. So it's great to be here together and actually face to face. So a little bit about me. I am Sam. I live in San Francisco with my wife and my mini dachshund. There's so many little dachshund things in my house everywhere. It's a lifestyle. If you know, you know. But I've spent the last 6 years in product internal comms at Google. And in the last 6 months, I moved into a specifically focused change communications role in people operations, aka HR. And I'm here today speaking in a personal capacity, not as a spokesperson for Google. I'm really passionate about the comms community and supporting each other. I'm grateful that things like Marcomm Grind exist. I know there's so many teams of one out there, and we need each other. So a little bit more about me. I'm also a coactive trained coach where I coach comms professionals to go from writer, behind the scenes, undervalued to becoming the trusted advisors and leaders that I know we can all be. And I also have a newsletter called The Inspiring Introvert about leadership communication for introverts and really anyone who wants to become more influential at work. So happy to be here, and let's get started.
We would like to kick things off and get a sense of the room to see how you feel about change and how you feel about what is happening in your organization. So yes, we have a mix. Change is ongoing. It's just part of the job, 37%, and 53%, everything is in flux, constant overlapping and transformation. Interesting. Sam, would you like to give us some thought about the result before we start?
It doesn't surprise me at all. I'm in bucket number 5 as well. There's so many different change transformations happening right now, whether it's technology, culture, structures of the organization to adapt to a future that might look fairly different. So not surprising at all, but that doesn't mean it's not kind of uncharted waters for us and hard to navigate. And so I think it's great that we're here together to talk about this. And I'll also say, I don't have all the answers. No one really has a crystal ball for the future. And I think the best thing we can do is to continue learning from each other.
Yes, absolutely. To continue to learn and support each other and see how we can adapt, adjust, and bringing the best of us. All right. I know before you were in internal comms, you spent 6 years in internal comms. So I would like to know what's been the biggest shift moving into change communication.
Yeah, I made this change about 6 months ago for a few reasons. And I want to talk about it a little bit because titles and what you actually do day to day does matter. I feel like there's not a lot of variance in our titles that you see on LinkedIn, but here's why I made the move. One is I kind of change roles every 2 years. The past 6 years, it's been internally at Google to kind of jump to a new learning curve. I like to think of how can I put myself in a zone where 30% of my work or more is kind of uncomfortable and new. And specifically focusing on 2 things when I made this move to change comms. One is I think internal and change comms are blending, and change comms and change management is blending as well. So how can I expand that skill set? I've done so many reorgs, but part of the difference now is real depth with the team I'm working on a longer term transformation versus being brought in towards the latter stages once the announcement is ready-ish and figured out. So it's an opportunity to influence and shape the narrative and vision much earlier in the process, even when they're conceiving of what is the big change or a series of big changes and shaping the vision. So build new skills, change management, and some business acumen. And then depth versus breadth is a trade-off I'm making right now. And so far, I find it really purposeful. Maybe I'll also just talk about one of the big observations so far of internal comms versus change comms, which is I feel like a lot of internal comms is about having a consistent campaign of messaging, right? Strategy, vision, mission, connecting people to that day in, day out. And sometimes in change comms, you want to do a bit of the opposite. You want to actually minimize the disruption and not distract people from their day-to-day work so they can do their job, and then only communicate when it's timely and tangible. I feel like a part of it too is really focusing on what matters to employees in their day-to-day work, clear priorities, autonomy and support to do your job well, and how we're investing in you. Those are some of my observations so far about what's a little different, and I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, it's very interesting that when you mentioned the difference between internal comms and change, because in my own company, I work very closely with a change team right now, and I completely relate to everything you say in terms of difference, campaign versus minimizing disruption, evergreen versus timely. So it's very great to have also this other perspective from the change team because sometimes it can be something that we don't really realize. And maybe we can have expectations from them that are not realistic because how they work and their goal and everything sounds quite different compared to internal comms. So great to have also your input on that. I would like to go a little bit deeper on the conversation right now and talking about the communication challenge in constant change. As we mentioned, as we saw, sorry, with our quick poll, we know that change is constant nowadays. So, according to you, what makes leadership communication actually land with employees?
So this won't be a surprise to anyone, but it's really all about trust and how much people believe in you as a leader and your vision. And it can take actually a long time to build that trust, but it can be lost in a moment. And so that's why it's so important to be consistent in your messaging and authentic to yourself and don't compromise on your values. Second, I would say action speaks louder than words when we're talking about change. Lay out your vision, make commitments, and actually follow through on them. Nothing can beat real progress that the vision is possible, and no amount of rhetoric can mask poor execution. So, I want to give you a little bit of a hot take here, which is with change, things should either be getting better or getting worse. Like the worst case scenario is actually stagnation if things are actually flat and exactly the same, because it undermines your credibility that anything is actually changing. Part of change means failures and iteration because that's where learning happens. It's never linear. If you think about your own behavior change in your life, it's not just up, up, and up. And so there's a really important leadership opportunity to role model and normalize failure as learning moments. It's a really hard cultural thing, but it's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I agree. Having open feedback are very important in this kind of situation. And that's why, where do you see the biggest gap between how strategy is defined at the top and how it's understood on the ground?
My kind of mental model of this is at the top, sometimes it's too abstract. Vision, we hear transformation so much. What does that even mean? Versus on the ground, it's all about action. So that's priorities, decisions. What are the tasks day to day? And it's really important to translate that vision into behaviors. And sometimes that's really hard for leaders because they operate at that 30,000-foot view. And it's where we add a lot of value, bridging that vision to what the employee experiences on the ground. And my tip would be really think about tangible versus intangible language. One example is how many companies have you ever heard do a one company or one Google kind of campaign, often to reduce silos, improve collaboration? It's been done a million times, but it goes nowhere unless you give people specifics. It might not be at the leadership level, it might be director and manager level, but you have to answer who do you actually need to work closer with and operationalize new ways of working to do that in tangible language. Can you actually do it? Do the thing that people are saying? Is it a behavior? Is it something you can hold and feel and know will be different? That's kind of the litmus test for is your communication actually effective?
This also reminds me that sometimes the definition itself of transformation can be very abstract, as you mentioned. So I would like to ask you, what is your definition of a change and transformation? Because for me, at the beginning, when I started to think about this topic, and because I work in communication in digital, I was thinking about digital transformation, how the company needs
Mm.
to use those new resources. But it can be something else as well. Depends of the company, it depends on what is happening. So if you could give a quick definition to someone who is completely new in this field, what would it be?
I think about the difference in scale. I think
Mm.
a change might be a reorg where you might have a leader transition or making a tweak to the org structure. Yes, that's a change. And transformation is much bigger. Sometimes multiple things, whether it's implementing technology plus changing the org structure plus a leadership change. So it can be multiple simultaneous things, or it could be reinventing the business model, trying to reinvent the culture. So it's really a matter of scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to know, you work for a large and fast scaling organization. So I would like to have your opinion about what does translating strategy into story and storytelling actually look like in practice?
I love this question because I love storytelling inside organizations. A few things. One is show versus tell is a principle I should probably get tattooed on my forehead because people make that mistake all the time. And working in tech, what's really cool is people are building products that you can actually show. So show them, what are you building? It doesn't need to be fully polished. You're not sharing this with the world. It's an amazing way to show proof of progress and get not just the most senior leaders talking about the change, but invite everyone to be a part of it and show what they're actually building. And so a big focus for me right now is bottoms up storytelling and finding peer role models, spotlighting the people who are actually living the change. And sometimes these are your best proof points, the kind of early adopters. And you can kind of create a positive sense of peer pressure where people see, oh, that was really cool. I'm going to give that a shot in a way that will influence behavior more than someone telling you what to do. I don't like being told what to do. I don't think most people like that. So seeing your peers modeling something in a really organic way is, oh, huh, maybe I should do that. And I think change just doesn't just go like this. If you want to really create behavior change in particular throughout an organization, it needs to be pretty horizontal with lots of informal leaders across the organization. I also want to just offer a framework that I use to think about this for the macro change story, which comes from Michael Margolis, who studies narrative intelligence, really interesting stuff. And it's really simple, which is why I love it. It's called see, feel, believe. So when you're telling a big picture change narrative, the C is imagining the positive future. That's the vision. The feel, which is really important, connecting with people, meeting them where they are, both the good and the bad, the resistance and the excitement, honestly connecting. And then the believe is give reasons to believe with proof of progress that the vision is possible. So if you hit those three things intentionally in that order, you kind of get people to buy in over time.
I love that. I love this example. And you said something that really rings a bell in my mind. Would you mind to give an example about how you work with a peer about a role model? How does that work in practice when you are with a peer to deal with all the changes that you needed to implement? How do you do that and how do you find it? Is it someone from your team, someone from another team but still in change? How does that work?
Yeah, finding the stories is honestly the hardest part, right? You know they're there, but where are they? And so that's where part of our job really becomes about relationships and how can you talk to as many people as possible. And this is honestly networking advice I give to. Every time you have a conversation with someone, ask, who else should I be talking to if my goal is this? And it creates a never ending cycle of great conversations and meeting wonderful people. And we can't know everything in comms and we only have so much time. So how can you help people work for you in a way to be, oh, I saw this great story Sam was just talking to me about, he's looking for them, and they connect the dots.
I think you mentioned something very important for our function, but not just our function. we don't know everything. And sometimes we need to be surrounded by people who will give different perspective, different insight, and will complement what we are doing. So I think this kind of tips can be very helpful. I would like to have your opinion about what's the difference between messaging that technically is absolutely correct and messaging that people believe, react, and remember.
I think there's a big gap between awareness, what people think they know, and what they really feel.
Agreed.
Or, in other words, emotion always beats information. If information was a barrier to behavior change, we'd all be millionaires with six packs, right? Because we have access to the world's information more than we could ever consume. So, clarity isn't enough. It's about communicating with conviction, and it needs to feel human. There's the Maya Angelou quote of people don't remember what you say, they remember how you make them feel. There's a reason why we always come back to that. And so, as you think about what emotions you want to generate, I tend to lean towards carrot versus stick of trust, connection, care, and vulnerability from a leader can really go a long way. But there's also a sense of urgency, discomfort. You just want people to feel something. And I'll say a mistake I see all the time from speakers of all levels really is focusing so much on the words and not enough on the delivery. You can say the right thing, but if you're not delivering it with your heart and with your presence, people tune out. Like I said, we're drowning in so much information that you really got to make people feel something to cut through. And I would say, as you advise leaders to do this, play to their strengths. Sometimes writing can work, but it can be hard to communicate emotion in writing, especially as a ghostwriter on behalf of somebody else. In general, we've been talking face to face for literally millennia. Most people are better in live conversation and in practice can get better on video. I mean, since 2020, we've been doing so many video calls. We're pretty well practiced. And when you get pushback on that, email is more efficient, it's faster. I think about the difference between efficiency and speed. Efficiency might be, oh, it only takes me 30 minutes to write this and get this out.
Yeah.
But is it actually effective? Are you achieving your goal? And when your goal is behavior change, emails don't really drive a lot of behavior change because they tend to lean more heavily information than emotion.
Yeah. And what do you think? Because when you were talking about different emotion, behavior change, you mentioned that sometimes it can be even discomfort, being uncomfortable. What do you think about a message that are technically right and provoke this kind of discomfort from our audience? Do you think this will be still a right message, a right lane, or not? Not at all. I know that when we talk about change, we also talk about uncomfortability, not being always clear about what's gonna happen next. So I was wondering if a message seems a little bit uncomfortable to read because it provokes different emotion, as you mentioned. How do you think about that? How would you advise leadership to do that?
It's a great question. With most changes, especially big ones, there needs to be discomfort because you're leaving what is comfortable and moving into something new that's unfamiliar. The thing is, you have to catch people. And what I mean by that is, if you made someone very uncomfortable and then just be, oh, bye, that's yours to deal with. Thank you very much. See you next week. That's not what leadership looks like. How do you
No.
create the discomfort of, you know what, let's look at this hard reality together. We are going to need to change, but we're in this together, and show how you have their back. You have to catch them with care on the back end of that and show how you're going to support them through it. And honestly, you're talking to a group of leaders. It is their job to lead through ambiguity and uncertainty, but leaders are also people. And so if you miss that care piece, they're not going to be equipped to lead their teams the way you need them to.
That's very true. And you know what? This rings a bell to me from an example coming from my previous company. Would you mind if I share it with you to get your
Yes,
opinion?
love it.
In my previous company, they lost a customer which happen even to the best of us. And they still decided to communicate internally about it because they also wanted to explain what's happened. So being very honest, transparent, and at some point vulnerable, and explain what they decided to do different. So they were also
Mm.
integrated the whole change approach to that. But I remember when I read the article for the first time, I find it with my communication hat amazing. But internally, for the leader, for the people in charge of this department, for even the people who work with customer, it was very difficult. And implementing those changes were also something a little bit tricky to them. But at the end, I remember the leader saying to my team, yes, it's not easy. It can feel like we failed, but no, we are just growing. We learn. It cannot always be successful. And now we have a framework of change to do better, to avoid this kind of mistake in the next time. And I find it very powerful because it's not always the case that a leader open it so vulnerably about something that didn't work and something that need to change with a different framework, a different vision. So I really think that you see who you are in front, you see who you have in front of you when this kind of example happen. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I like what you said at the end there. Character, you show your character in difficult moments. And it's not vulnerability if you're not uncomfortable, but it can be really hard to go first, especially if there's not a culture that rewards vulnerability and the learning afterwards. Often you need to do so much recognition and appreciation of it to continue the behavior. And on the bad side, if the people are punished for admitting a mistake, the behavior you're reinforcing is, we know that mistakes are going to happen. You're just saying, go hide them. And that's not
Mm.
good for the business. I mean, there's been so many scandals over the last several years where there's that kind of culture, and you see the impact making its way out into the public. And it's all symptomatic of a culture of dishonesty and hiding and incentives that don't actually reinforce the behaviors that you need to be successful, which involves learning, growth, and vulnerability as a key part of that.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. We're gonna go to the last part of our conversation, and it's a part that we talk a lot during our preparation. We were talking a lot about what is the advisor behind the voice of change? How do we earn and use our influence? So my first question regarding that will be, how do communicators earn that trust, that trusted advisor role with leader, and what does it take to keep it? How do they do it to gain this trust and keep it on the long run?
I love this question so much. This is a topic I'm really passionate about, write about all the time. Three parts. So, first, no one is lying awake at night thinking, should I invite Sam to be part of this leadership conversation or not? That thought never even crosses people's mind.
No.
No one is waiting to invite you, so you can't wait for permission. You have to ask. And how I would approach doing that is build relationships with the senior leader, who's maybe your primary client or stakeholder, and the people they trust. Maybe the chief of staff, their admin, their HR partner. Be part of that trusted circle around them. And often the people around the leader have more time than they do. And you're all focused on a common goal of helping them be successful. So honestly, just ask to join the leadership meetings. And here's why. You need context because it's critical to go from just someone who wordsmiths emails from time to time to having real impact on business goals. And if you can start to even show examples of that, maybe even before you're in the meeting, of ways you can have more impact than just writing or just the final polishing, they're like, oh, they get a taste. And then I can do this a lot more for you if you include me and give me more context. It makes it a pretty no-brainer decision. A secondary way to do that is just be a sense maker. And what that means is be the bridge between leaders and employees, bringing data, insights, examples, which is such a valuable perspective for them. Because again, they operate at this level. They're interacting with VPs, C-level directors, 99% of their meetings, but most of the organization is not that level. And so how can you bring the real talk of what's going on and help make them bridge that gap and connect them? I would also say the best relationships I've had with leaders, I always remember that they're people too, with strengths and limitations. And if you can find a leader where you have complementary skills, part of what our skills and internal comms are being pretty perceptive about communication is leadership. And so you see all the little faux pas and nuances, and they usually relate to something deeper, whether it's insecurity or overconfidence or too high level versus really connecting with people. And if you can identify those things and then help them and then show them the impact that better communication is having, you have to show your work. No one else is going to advocate for you. And then just the last thing is do great work. That's the best way to earn trust, be reliable, follow through on what you say you'll do. That's kind of table stakes.
Yeah, I also think that, so I love how you phrase it. No one is inviting you, you can wait for permission but ask. I also think this is easier to do either when you join a company for the first time. I think it's you can
Yeah,
already say that you would like to attend those meetings, blah blah blah, or when you move within your company but into a new role and you needed to meet the leader of this new team. I think those two opportunities are can be the bridge to attend those kind of meeting and earn trust and earn credibility.
100% agree. People
Yeah,
normalize to the role you put yourself in. So if you position yourself as maybe inadvertently as a behind the scenes person, bring me in at the last minute, that becomes the norm. And so it's those opportunities when you're working with on a new team for the first time with a new leader, new to an organization, set your own expectations for who you want to be as a leader, as a trusted advisor, and tell everybody it will always be a part of our job to educate people on who we are and what we do. I
yeah,
mean, I
absolutely.
could go down a rabbit hole of what people think comms is. I won't, but a lot of people still equate comms with writing words. Make it sound pretty, make it look good. And that's such a surface level understanding of our real value. But we have to bust that myth by proving it and educating. And that's part of the work every day, on top of how busy we are trying to clean up messes and think strategically and be proactive. It's a lot on our plates. But if you don't do the foundational work of advocating for yourself and educating people on what you do and what value you bring, you're going to be stuck.
Yeah. What I like about your perspective is that we need to speak up for ourselves. As you mentioned,
Yes,
no one will do it for ourselves. We need to do when we are doing an initiative or a project, we need to do a follow-up with the data, with metric to okay, what is next? Based on that, maybe next time you can do on this, on that. And I think this makes a whole difference between execution and being strategic advisor, I would say. So so thinking about it, it makes me think about also the downside of this approach. Based on your experience, what common mistake do you think people make on the journey from execution to strategy? From your view, based on what you see with the two different approaches, what is a common mistake?
and I've made this mistake multiple times throughout my career, and it's the doer trap or the execution trap. What that means is you can get anything done. You can magically turn some kind of mess into something memorable, even without much context or insight, which is amazing, right? It means you're reliable. It makes you great at what you do. But the side effect of that is people keep chucking half baked ideas over the fence at you, and you have to make sense of them. Honestly, that gets old. That's not fun at all. That's not where you want to be influencing. And it's easy to get stuck because you're so good at the craft of the work. And so what do? First, take care of your well-being. You want to be in the right mind space of who do you want to be and how do you want to be seen. And so when you feel stuck, don't let it eat away at you. Really focus on what you can control and try and step back. I know our jobs can be kind of always on, but if you get caught up in doing, you lose sight of what really matters.
Yeah.
And I would also say there's so many different ways to influence beyond doing the work. And these are really important skills for us to build. So if you think about delegation is managing down or horizontally, cross-functional influence is very horizontal. How can you help more people be capable, competent, do their own writing, do their own work, and maybe you look at it at the very end. How do you manage up both with your boss, with your leaders, your stakeholders? And a big part of our roles, I see all internal comms people as leaders, but we lead without the formal authority. But what we do is absolutely leadership. And if you can get things done beyond what are seen as traditional comms or what people think comms is, you educate people not just through your words, but through your actions. And maybe one last tip I'll give here is really be a listener. Understand what the underlying need is in every conversation, every task. Always ask, what problem are we trying to solve? Repeat back what you're hearing to show that you're really listening and you care, and invest in those relationships, particularly laterally and diagonally. So that means your boss's peers, the leader's peers. If you build trust with the people, with everyone around your main client, they can't help but trust you too. Obviously, that one-on-one relationship is important, but people overlook the ecosystem around them.
Yeah, it's what you said really resonate as the job of someone who is a leader, not just on the title, but also on the approach, the mentality, and the strategy. For me, a good advisor is also a good leader because, as you mentioned, if we are just doing executive task, at some point we are even losing ourselves in the middle. So I think it's important also to see that a good advisor for leadership is a potential great leader as well. I do think those two approach are complementary based on what you said.
Yeah, and think about it on a spectrum. From are you only doing the work? Are you only advising? You want to be somewhere in between. Where do you want to find yourself, basically,
Yeah.
on that spectrum? You always need to be doing both. If you're not doing the work, you're too disconnected from what's really happening. And that's why a lot of us chose this profession in the first place. But if you're only a doer, you're kind of capping your potential. And there's so much more fun opportunity, and you can scale your impact coaching leaders, counseling them, being involved in the business strategy, shaping things way more upstream. These days, I find myself drawn more there because there's so much opportunity to shape not just what's said, but what's done and the
Yeah.
decisions and priorities.
And how do you want to be perceived? You want to be perceived by your peers, by leadership, the strategic advisor at the end. Okay, that's great. We are reaching the very end of our conversation. So before we jump up into the Q&A, I have one more last question for you. Based on everything we say and your experience, what's one thing that most consistently separates good leadership communication from truly great leadership in communication? I do think you share a little bit about it during the last question.
Yeah, I want to say something here that you might not have heard before. So, great leaders are able to manage the paradoxes. What
Yeah.
that means is you can hold two opposing ideas together in mind at the same time, or oscillate kind of between them. So, a few examples. Can you be humble and have conviction? Can you be patient with the person, but impatient with the problem? Can you be high level and strategic and deeply connected to the people and their work experience? just to flesh that out a little bit more, humility is something that I always admire in leaders, and conviction to make decisions. But those can be opposing forces sometimes. And so humility can look embracing the space to not know and explore and willing to challenge assumptions. And the benefit is that you bring forward the wisdom of the group. You don't have to know it all by yourself. That's so important to leadership. And as a result, you get better decisions. So many people, so many leaders are surrounded by yes people. And the outcome of that is unchallenged, kind of weak thinking. Biases get worse and worse over time. And part of our roles is to be truth tellers. Most people don't tell leaders the truth. Yeah. But especially if you're a reporting line, if you don't report to them, you have more freedom to do that. And it's actually your responsibility. And if we relate back to being a trusted advisor, being a truth teller is such a big part of that. And then on the conviction side, you have to be able to make swift decisions with imperfect information. Like, you're never going to have a crystal clear picture and know a decision is going to work out 100%. You have to acknowledge the uncertainty and ambiguity and lead through it anyway. People are looking to you for direction, and so you always have to bring that.
Completely agree. And I like when you say that we need to be honest with leadership and say the truth, because it's such an underestimated skill. And I know it can be very difficult for some people to be in that shoes, but I think we are making a favor to ourselves, because some harder truth needs to be said loud sometimes for the good of the company, of the business, or even for our own sanity. So I really like that you highlight this part. I think it's so important. I would like to ask you, what does being a leader mean to you?
It's really not about title. I think all comms people are leaders, have potential to be leaders. It's really about trust and influence. But you can't be a leader without followers. It's part of the definition. And no one will follow you without strong relationships, which was a big theme from our conversation about lateral, managing up, managing down, diagonal. The more relationships and advocates you have across the business, the more influence you have. And this is why communication skills are so important, because they're all about trust, connection, influence. And the thing I want to leave you with is we're all already leaders. We develop strategies, we build or contribute to high-performing teams, and we inspire our peers and leaders and the people around us to be more human. And that in itself is leadership. I'll say sometimes there's a gap between where people don't see us as a leader, and closing it often starts with how you see yourself and your own confidence. And we have the opportunity to step into leadership much, much more across the board in internal comms than we do today. But it starts with seeing yourself that way.
Sam, a big thank you for the clarity, the very concrete insight and example you shared today. I think it's exactly the kind of conversation that we need. So thank you for your time and your generosity.